The term of office has come to an end, and that means that Andrés Manuel López Obrador is leaving. You may not be familiar with him, but López Obrador, popularly known as AMLO, has been president of Mexico for the past 6 years and is an icon of the international left. Not to mention a constant headache for the Biden administration. Well, these are now the final days of a government that in Mexico that has been an authentic roar in popularity. If AMLO were a celebrity, he would be somewhere between Guillermo del Toro and Salma Hayek. To illustrate this, of all the major leaders around the world, López Obrador is the second most popular. And what can I say? That ranking, at the end of his administration, is quite an achievement, especially for a Hispanic politician. However, as we told you in our recent video on corruption and lack of security in Mexico, the results of his presidency in addressing the country's main problems have been rather poor, and that's to say the least. To give you an idea, take a look at how this election campaign has been.
Mexico is heading towards its most violent election ever, with 30 candidates murdered, 77 threatened, and 11 kidnapped. More than 170 attacks have been committed against politicians in the lead-up to the June elections.
In fact, it has been the bloodiest electoral campaign in its history, from its beginning to its end.
Deadly end to Mexico campaign as local candidate shot.
VisualPolitik community. Despite AMLO's enormous popularity, Mexico's problems are the same as always, and on some issues, they've become even worse. In the political arena then, what can I say? López Obrador has gone his own way, even crossing absolutely inadmissible lines. Do you want an example? Well, let's take a look at a recent one.
López Obrador defends his decision to reveal a journalist's phone number. It was not a mistake. I would do it again. The president maintains that his moral authority and his right to defend himself are above the law.
AMLO seems to interpret his high popularity as a carte blanche to place himself above everything and everyone. Publishing a journalist's phone number because her media outlet, the New York Times, published an investigation into alleged drug financing of his 2018 election campaign is, whichever way you look at it, a form of intimidation. A warning to other journalists that if they say negative things about the president and the government, they will not stand idly by, even if it means exposing their personal information and bringing a pack of radical followers down on them. I don't know about you, but if you believe that the information that has been spread is false, then the best thing to do would be to go to court. But do you know the worst thing? When he was criticized for having that attitude, he went and said he would do it again. This is Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the politician we are telling you about. And it's precisely that topic that the New York Times was talking about, drug trafficking. That is one of the things we are going to deal with in this video. Because let's see, it's no secret, the Mexican cartels are among the most powerful and dangerous criminal organizations in the world. I'm sorry for all our Mexican viewers. I know that it might look like that we're reinforcing a stereotype, but what can I say? You can't do a complete analysis of Mexico without taking a look at the Narcos. And that's even more true given the accusations that have been going on for some years now between this country and its northern neighbor, the United States. According to the United States, the Mexican government is not doing enough to control the enormous flow of drugs entering the country through the southern border. And let's see, their complaints are justified. For example, it is estimated that 90% of all cocaine and all opiates, such as fentanyl, that enter the United States illegally do so from Mexico. 90%. That's crazy. Practically a monopoly. And if we add to this the problem of illegal immigration, we can be clear. The border between Mexico and Uncle Sam is hotter than a jalapeno in a sauna. And while it's true that these have been trouble spots for quite some time, many analysts believe that during AMLO's administration, things have only gone from bad to worse. And surely you know what this means, right? Exactly. That relations with the United States are cooling faster than a popsicle in the middle of the Arctic. And that's exactly what has happened during this presidency.
Relations between the United States and Mexico are at a critical juncture as top Biden administration officials press Mexico's government to do more to blunt soaring migration and to confront drug cartels producing fentanyl.
Now, has AMLO looked the other way on the drug trafficking issue? What about the increase in irregular migration to the United States? Does the Biden administration have reason to be angry? Well, let's take a look.
A criminal lie.
In recent years, drugs have been hitting the streets of the United States with unprecedented harshness. And yes, I know what you're thinking. There were a lot of problems with this issue in the 80s and 90s. And it's true. The problem is that never before has a narcotic as strong as fentanyl been so widely used. Not long ago, we told you in a video here on VisualPolitik how this drug was terrorizing the entire world, starting with Uncle Sam. In this country, we have seen cities like Philadelphia, Baltimore, and San Francisco with streets full of people practically in a zombie state. Worse still, there are an estimated 70,000 deaths per year as a result of this substance alone, which is 50 times more potent than heroin. And now, you may be thinking, what on earth are you saying? What do Mexico and AMLO have to do with the fentanyl problem in the United States? Well, what if I told you that fentanyl production is concentrated mainly in this country, and that it has skyrocketed during the López Obrador administration and his hugs not bullets policy? You don't believe me? Then take a look for yourselves. What you see on the screen are the figures for fentanyl seizures at the US-Mexico border. We can interpret it as the only official figure that serves to measure the flow of trafficking of this substance between the two countries. AMLO came to power on 1st of December 2018. Now, you see the coincidence, don't you? Well, this is a reality that, until very recently, the Mexican president, instead of confronting and fighting to eradicate it, decided to do exactly the opposite, to deny everything. AMLO even went so far as to say that the fentanyl crisis in the United States was a cultural problem that could be solved. Yes, you guessed it, with hugs. And no, we're not pulling your leg. Just take a look.
Mexico's president said Friday that American families were to blame for the fentanyl overdose crisis for not giving their children enough hugs.
Anyway, this, as you can imagine, did not sit well in the United States. Nevertheless, by March of this year, with the epidemic of this substance out of control in the United States, AMLO had no choice but to recognize what was an open secret: that it is precisely in Mexico where this lethal substance that is ruining families and entire neighborhoods as never before is produced.
Fentanyl is produced in the United States, in Canada, and in Mexico, and the chemical precursors come from Asia.
This information is precisely what the DEA, the US Drug Enforcement Administration, had been pointing out for years, and that AMLO himself refused to acknowledge. Years of time wasted in a struggle that has claimed tens of thousands of lives. And who knows, perhaps many of them could have been saved if the problem had been recognized and action had been taken earlier. But obviously, that is something that cannot be known. But the question is, what leads the president of a country to first deny the evidence for years, only to have to admit it later on? More importantly, what does his presidency have to do with the rise of this substance?
The problem is that fentanyl has also begun to establish itself as a drug locally consumed in Mexico. Consumption is still light years behind the US figures, but for the first time in recent years, people addicted to and in treatment for this substance have begun to be detected within Mexico itself. For example, some medical services in Tijuana, the second most populated city in the country, report that they treat 3 fentanyl overdoses every night.
True, this compared to Philadelphia seems like a trifle, but the problem is growing at a rate of 50 to 80% year on year. No joke. So, faced with this development, the Mexican government has had no choice but to start taking measures to pressure the cartels to abandon the production of this substance. And that, along with unparalleled pressure from the DEA, has put fear right into the heart of the Sinaloa cartel itself. And pay attention because this story seems to be taken from a Hollywood blockbuster.
Los Chapitos forbids the sale and production of fentanyl in Sinaloa.
But who are the Chapitos, and why are they banning the production of fentanyl? Well, you see, Los Chapitos are a faction of the Sinaloa cartel, and they are given that name because they are led by the sons of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. As you may know, El Chapo Guzman was the leader of that cartel, and he was arrested and extradited to the United States back in 2017. Well, just 1 year after that, in 2018, was when AMLO came to power, and at that time, Los Chapitos started producing fentanyl like there was no tomorrow. The objective? To flood the US market with this narcotic. A narcotic that is straightforward and cheap to produce and easy to distribute.
The U.S. Department of Justice makes it clear that the criminal kingdom of Los Chapitos grew exponentially from 2019 to 2021, which coincides with the mandate of President Andrés Manuel López Obrador.
And so they became the largest group exporting illegal fentanyl to the United States. In fact, with the idea of eliminating small producers and centralizing fentanyl production themselves in the north, close to the border, Los Chapitos ordered the elimination of any fentanyl producers in Sinaloa and other regions to the south of them. So what was the outcome? The small producers have moved north, further away from their control, into areas such as Baja California. But narco war stories aside, the fact is that when El Chapo's arrest took place, his rival cartel, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to eat away at the Sinaloa cartel by trying to absorb its market. And in order to do so, this cartel not only increased the production and trafficking of, let's just call them traditional narcotics, but they also did the same with fentanyl. Well, all this caused fentanyl production to go through the roof. As if that were not enough, it all happened in the face of an astonishing passivity on the part of the Mexican government. A passivity that is not only due to its total inability to deal with the problem, but also, apparently, to a simple lack of will.
Mexico's president says he won't fight drug cartels on U.S. orders, calls it a Mexico First policy.
And let's be clear, what this means is that the Mexican government never really intended to collaborate with Washington to try to contain this scourge. Well, I suppose there is a certain populist tinge here. If the United States tells me to do it, I take no notice. We are not going to surrender to Yankee imperialism. Anyway, what can I say? The problem is that the results of this gamble have been a disaster. I wish I could say otherwise. López Obrador's government has allowed the cartels to reorganize and has done very little to stop them, either intentionally or out of sheer incompetence. There is, for instance, the fiasco of his flagship security plan, the creation of the National Guard, something that we already talked about recently here on VisualPolitik. To give you an idea, arrests in the country have fallen from 21,700 in 2018, when the federal police still existed, to about 3,000 in 2022 with the National Guard. And of course, we might think, well, maybe that's because they're so effective in crime prevention now, and that's why they've gone down so much, right? No, that's got nothing to do with it. It's basically because the National Guard, due to its mostly military character, hardly ever investigates crimes, simply because the military is not prepared for such tasks. The truth is that now these organizations have mutated from pyramidal to hierarchical structures to much more atomized and independent ones. This means that they are much more difficult to detect, pursue, and eradicate. And not only that, although it's something they have been doing for a long time, the cartels have pushed even further their infiltration into the legal economy in sectors such as fishing, agriculture, forestry, and even real estate. In the end, it's a process similar to what happened in Italy with the mafia, which takes advantage of the corruption of the state and the lack of controls to hide behind layers of legality, and thus launder dirty drug money. And I'm sorry to say it, but that is a problem that has become greater during AMLO's administration. The fact is that these types of gambles have left relations with Mexico's northern neighbors quite shaken.
To begin with, in 2021, the López Obrador government imposed restrictions on the operations of the DEA and its agents in the country with the approval of the Mexican Foreign Agents Law, a law that has put the brakes on the fight against drug trafficking. The DEA has gone so far as to say that cooperation from Mexican anti-drug agencies is often practically non-existent, and its own director, Ann Milgram, has accused the Mexicans of not sharing information about drug labs or drug trafficking groups, which is a fairly recent development.
Again, as we saw with corruption and security in the last video on Mexico, promises and reality don't tend to line up very well when we're talking about AMLO, but pay attention because that is not all. If during AMLO's administration, narcotics and the production of the most dangerous substance the streets of the United States have ever seen grew, a very similar thing has happened with illegal immigration. We could say that for the United States, the AMLO administration has been a headache, and in this sense, the border issue plays an even more relevant role in the political arena. Watch out, this may even be crucial to the US presidential elections.
The border, an eternal question.
Let's see, I think you all know, Mexico has traditionally been one of the main points of immigration to the United States, and for several years now, it has not only been a country of origin, but also a transit country. This means that hundreds of thousands of migrants, particularly from Central America, from countries such as Guatemala, Honduras, or El Salvador, pass through Mexico in their pursuit of the American dream. The fact is that the massive entry of people into the United States through this border has always been one of the country's biggest headaches. And yes, this was happening long before AMLO. I'm sure you all remember Trump's wall on the border with Mexico.
Trump promises wall and massive deportation program.
At that time, in 2016, López Obrador was not yet president, and the problem of illegal immigration was a big one, but nothing compared to what was to come. Let's take a look at this graph. In May 2019, with López Obrador already in power and in the midst of Trump's presidency, illegal entries into the US increased threefold over the previous year. And since then, and throughout AMLO's presidency, with the sole exception of the worst phases of the pandemic, the number of irregular immigrants crossing from Mexico into the United States have only grown and grown and grown. Clearly, not all the blame is theirs. The COVID-19 pandemic has driven up poverty levels in the usual immigration source countries, and that has caused many more people to flee in search of the American dream. So what's the problem? That once the pandemic passed, and with the economies theoretically regaining traction, the situation, far from improving, continues to worsen. From October of last year through March of 2024, US border agents have recorded more than 1.34 million encounters with irregular immigrants at the border. That is almost 10% more than in the same period last year. Now, many of you may be thinking, what on earth does this have to do with López Obrador? Is it his fault? Has there been any collaboration between his government and Biden's in this matter either? Well, let's just say that the reality is that part of it is, and part of it isn't.
On the one hand, as part of his more humane vision of migration, AMLO agreed with the Biden administration to create safe migratory passages and to grant thousands of humanitarian and work visas so that migrants could settle in Mexico. This may have generated a certain call to action effect for more immigrants to try, since if they did not manage to enter the United States, they could at least try to have a chance in Mexico, which at the end of the day is not as bad as their countries of origin. However, the truth is that despite this, the collaboration between Mexico and the United States on immigration issues has yielded very few achievements in recent years. Perhaps most notable is an agreement to create immigration processing centers in Mexico where immigrants must process their refugee status outside the United States. In fact, one is already in operation, but there's little else.
Now, with all that we have told you so far, we on VisualPolitik could well say that AMLO's government has been a failure, at least in terms of corruption, security, drug trafficking, illegal immigration, worsening relations with the United States, and these are not trivial matters. And VisualPolitik community, all this seems to have a common link: a misguided policy that has lasted too long.
There are those who maintain, and I respect them, that what has to be done is to use force or that coercive measures are the way to solve the problem. I think that evil cannot be confronted with evil.
Beautiful words. Yet the reality is often a bit more complex, especially when we bring drug cartels into the equation. So you see, AMLO's hugs seem not only to have reduced the bullets, but may end up increasing them, especially for the United States. Interestingly, AMLO may be Trump's best ally, because truth be told, he's making it very difficult for a Biden administration that sees immigration control of one of its major weaknesses. Be that as it may, the problems Mexico faces today in terms of drug trafficking, massive illegal immigration, and organized crime gaining power are even worse than they were in 2018, when the current president came to power. And what about the economy? We'll soon talk about that right here on VisualPolitik. For now, the questions are for you. Do you think AMLO has taken the right stance against criminal organizations and the migration problem? Do you think AMLO's presidential candidate, Claudia Sheinbaum, will suffer for the results of her predecessor's policies? Well, leave us your opinions below in the comments, and let's start a debate. Now, very importantly, if you liked this video, please like it and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already done so. As always, thank you so much for being there. All the best. I'll see you next time.